and welcome to this virtual edition of Advanced Reading Strategies for Graduate Students. Before we get started, I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Rebecca, and I am one of the graduate assistants at Learning Services, and I'm so excited to walk you through some strategies and techniques and some things to think about as you plan to read and get ready for a semester as a graduate student. Hello, and welcome to this virtual edition of Advanced Reading Strategies for Graduate Students, a workshop for all you graduate students who want to learn how to improve your reading strategies in your graduate program. So before we get started, I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Rebecca, and I'm one of the graduate assistants at Learning Services. So as I share my slides, I want to let you know about Learning Services, which is a department on campus that is really here for all of your learning needs. So we normally are located in Sub 1 in room 3129. Our phone number, which is in use at the moment, is 703-993-2380, and our website is learningservices.gmu.edu. And you can use that phone number to call and make an appointment for academic coaching, which I'll describe in a second, and you can also go to our website to find lots of good resources and to learn more about our offerings. You can also find us on social media, where we post announcements about our upcoming workshops, and we also post some tips related to studying. So some more about what we offer on our YouTube page, Mason Learning Services. We have other virtual workshops just like this one, and we also have some shorter videos where we explain some useful strategies that you might be interested in. We also have a list of tutoring resources on campus, both in person and virtual, depending on when you're watching this, and that's on our website. And then one of the most important things I think we have is our workshops, which you can find and register for on mason360.gmu.edu. We offer a ton of really cool resources on, or workshops rather, excuse me, on sleeping better, improving your concentration, overcoming procrastination, you name it, we have it. They're super great, and I hope you check them out. And last but not least, we also have free academic coaching, which is one-on-one coaching where you can meet with myself or one of our other graduate assistants. And this is a good opportunity for you to kind of think about and apply what you've learned from this workshop or another workshop, and kind of talk with someone to say, hey, I really want to improve my time management. Can you help me make a schedule? And we can kind of work with you one-on-one to identify your goals and help you work towards them, whether it's related to scheduling, implementing new reading strategies, or just practicing how to reach out to professors and ask for feedback, or we can refer you to other campus services on campus. Yeah, we try to help you in any way that we can. So I hope you make an appointment with us. And that to make an appointment, you can go to tinyurl.com/masonlearning. And if you look at this image here, you would be scheduling a learning assistance appointment with us, Learning Services, and you can schedule that online, or when we're in person, we also meet in person. Okay, enough about Learning Services. Now I want to dive in. So in order to dive in, I'm going to start you off with a little brain teaser exercise, and I'll give you a few seconds. If you want to pause the video, go for it, to basically try to read through this paragraph and see if you can understand it. So I welcome you to pause the video now. I'll wait a few seconds and then I'll go over it. Okie doke. So we're back, and if you got the clue, it was basically that you have to read this little paragraph back and forth. So it reads, "This little card is just an eye catcher to help you realize that there is always another way to do almost anything, including reading. The first time, it is always hard to do something a new way, but read this again now that you have the hang of it. Gets easier, doesn't it?" So this is sort of like a fun little, again, brain teaser to kind of just show you that there's lots of ways to read things, and it's really meant to challenge you to think in new ways, to try new ways to read, because a lot of us have been reading in a certain way since high school, since undergrad, and I really want you to take the next hour or so to kind of take in these new tips, to think about new ways to read and get the most out of your reading for your graduate program, for your graduate research. So yeah, we want to break our old habits, get out of our comfort zone, and try new things. Okay, so a few of our goals are going to be as follows. First, I'm going to start us off learning about the study cycle. Then we're going to discuss some challenges to reading. I'll give you some tips about reading faster, and then skimming. We're going to think about a little bit about recitation, and then discuss how to mark your textbook or other sources of reading material. And then I'll go over some more specific tools that can be used for a textbook, for essays, for research articles, and for other literary sources. So that's our little agenda, and I'm excited to dive in. So first, I'm going to start telling you about the study cycle. Now, the study cycle is kind of interesting because it's what I like to say is sort of your ideal way of approaching school, right? And as a fellow graduate student, I understand the term ideal is key here, but I want you to sort of listen and maybe evaluate where you are as far as how well you follow this. So phase 1 of the study cycle is basically to preview material to be covered in class before class. So this is reading all the readings that your professor assigns for a certain class, just to kind of get that foundational background information so you can come to class prepared and have a good underlying knowledge, and a good way to, it's a good way to prepare and prime yourself to go to class. If you read beforehand, then you can go to class prepared with questions, actually. If you didn't understand something in the reading, you can ask the professor to go into more detail about this. You can bring up a controversial point that you thought was interesting. So in addition to be prepared for class, it's also a good time to, work through all your readings, do the work, so that, again, you're starting to get that background information, because in a graduate program, it is very, your program's likely very specific, and so you have a lot of maybe background research to learn about. So then you've done your readings. You go to class. I say go to class in quotes because that could look like going to class in person, watching your recorded lecture, or maybe attending a synchronous virtual lecture. And this is your opportunity, like I said, to bring your questions, to participate, communicate with your fellow colleagues and professor, to try to listen as actively as possible. This is when, now that you have that background information, the professor will provide extra details and extra ways of applying this information in the field. So take notes, do your best to stay focused and stay motivated as you attend each of these classes, because at the end of the day, I hate to say it, but you paid a lot of money to, go to these classes. So I say this more for the undergrads who may skip. So I know you guys don't need reminding, but yeah, it's important to go to class. Okay, so then phase 3 is what I usually say is the part that a lot of students forget or don't do. Essentially, it's really important, and this will be kind of a recurring theme throughout the workshop, but it's really important after you do something or after you take in a lot of information to review and process what has been said. So maybe read over your notes, write a quick summary sentence, take 5 minutes even just to say, okay, what did the professor just talk about? What did I take away? What's something I maybe need to go do as far as assignments, or what's something I didn't understand that I then want to go look into more? It's just to kind of debrief and help you process. And this really helps your brain kind of make sense of everything and not feel so, lost and confused after a 3-hour lecture, right? So then, last but not least, you want to use those what we call intentional study sessions. And this is sort of outside of your regular weekly routine. Phases 1, 2, 3 go week to week or class to class, where phase 4 is anytime you're maybe doing additional studying to write a paper or to study for a test, or just to kind of go over that material that you still don't quite understand and you want to do some extra studying around that. So yeah, so this is the study cycle. This is sort of the, like I said, ideal footprint for how to go about class, how to go about your graduate program, and it's sort of a broad look at like what college is meant to be. And the more you follow this cycle, the more you'll be getting out of your graduate program. You'll be getting the most research and knowledge and information if you follow this. So yeah. So what are the challenges of reading in grad school? Well, I know quite a few. First and foremost probably is the volume of reading. So compared to undergrad, there's a lot more reading, a lot more dense articles that are maybe assigned by your professor, more reading to write longer papers that you're having to write. So it's definitely a lot, and it can be overwhelming, but thankfully for you, I'm going to teach you some ways to make the reading not seem as overwhelming today. Another reason that grad school reading can be more challenging is the fact that there may be a lot more primary sources to kind of read through, which are maybe written for a specific audience, or you might have to be judging whether these sources are reliable or useful, and so they can be sort of esoteric, or just not your average summary textbook that's giving you an overview. They could be a little more dense and confusing, and then they're just like a lot more to work through. Going off that, the readings might be a lot more complex than you're used to, or that you've been having to deal with for the most part. In terms of language, things can be really specific to the field, or the subject matter might be more complex, more detailed, and so it's a lot to kind of sift through, and so it takes longer maybe to read, or harder to understand. And going off that, there may be a lot of jargon, so terminology that is very specific, again, to the field of study that you're in, and words that maybe don't go off the definition that lay people use, or your average person might think of it anyway. So there's a lot more jargon, a lot more terms that you might need to be looking up or cross-referencing with other material just to get a sense of what they mean. So overall, there's more reading, and the reading itself is a little more complicated and thus taxing. So we want to make it easier for you because that, is not fun if it feels too taxing. We want to make you, again, get the most out of your graduate experience. So how can we do that? How can we deal with the volume of reading, first of all? Well, I got some news for you, and it's some exciting news, I would like to think, is that you're not encouraged to read every single word on every single page. Now, what I mean by that is that, again, another theme that I'm going to kind of talk about in this workshop is that we want to be strategic about our reading. So if you're just having to read articles to write a research paper, you might want to start off just reading the abstracts so that you know what articles you want to apply to your research paper. Or if you're just needing to read a little bit to participate in a class discussion, you might not get super in depth, but rather just capture a few key points that you want to address in class. Or if you're reading to present on something, rather, that would be something where you really need to know the nitty-gritty. So again, we want to be efficient and we want to be strategic in how we read, and so you're not going to be reading every word on every single page. Rather, I'm going to teach you some ways to skim and divide and conquer and kind of summarize and get the main ideas from your readings. Another really, really, really great tool for dealing with the volume of reading is to use study groups. And these are a really great way to kind of divide and conquer. So you and your fellow students can divide the readings and then maybe share notes. And it's honestly so many benefits to study groups. One is that, you get to kind of distribute the workload a little bit. You can also learn actually what you're reading by having to explain it to someone else. When we explain concepts to someone else, we're more likely to understand it ourselves. And this can also give you some teaching practice if you're going down that sort of academia route. The only disadvantage to study groups is probably that we can over-rely on study groups, or people might not show up prepared. So, you guys are all reliable graduate students. I know. So at the end of the day, I think study groups are really great, and they are a good way to kind of help you out as long as you're doing your part and actually coming to the group with what the group has asked you, right? Okay. Another really great tool or tip for making reading not seem like so much is to convert text to MP3, or essentially listening to your readings. So this could be done by downloading the audio version of a book, to using different software to translate text to MP3. And I have some software listed on the next page, the next slide, which I'll show you. But really great for helping you maybe listen to your readings while you're driving or cleaning or exercising, or if you just want to switch it up, instead of having to read everything visually, you can do half and half. Or if you're that kind of person who maybe wants to listen and look at the words, it can just help you really get that information and retain it to the best of your ability. So great way to bring in that auditory component to your readings. And then lastly, you want to read faster. And I'm sure a lot of you hope to read faster, or think like, that's the automatic solution to saying, no, there's a lot of readings, I just have to get through faster, right? And I have a lot of students who say, like, can you just teach me how to read faster? And so reading, like anything, is a skill that can be practiced and can be strengthened. So I'll teach you a few things in a second to help you read faster. But also, I will say, as a caveat, be patient with yourself. It is a lot. And so in addition to reading faster, you also want to be strategic and pick and choose what you want to do. Get the most out of your reading. Okay. So before going forward, I mentioned that there are a lot of good software app can translate your text to speech. One of them is the Read and Write tool by Text Help. You can also find, pens that kind of record a lecture and mark where you're at in the lecture based on where you write your notes. It's hard to explain, but it's really cool. And if you go to ati.gmu.edu/at-resources, there are all of these great tools on the page. Some are more made for people with people who are visually impaired or hearing impaired, things like that. But a lot of them are good for any of us who just want different ways to consume our reading, right? So great tool. Definitely check it out. Okay, so I mentioned reading faster. Before reading faster, I actually wanted to mention, in addition to kind of listening to your readings, another thing that comes up a lot with my students or students I'm working with is, the fact that now we're reading a lot of our, journals and articles on the computer. So, if you have the means or if you want to, I would highly suggest printing articles if you feel like reading them on the computer is more draining or more taxing or just not as good for you. So printing articles definitely can help. Or if you feel like just drained from looking at the computer a lot, I definitely recommend taking breaks in your reading and not straining your eyes so much. So taking breaks, but also using things like blue light locking, filters on the computer software, or getting blue light locking glasses. They can be really helpful as we're, again, reading a lot of our stuff digitally. So printing and preparing for reading on a computer is definitely part of all of this, I would say. Okay, so going back to reading faster, the first thing we want to do is, funnily enough, reducing distractions, because a lot of times our length of reading actually doesn't come from maybe how slow our pace is, but rather because we get distracted so much. And by we, I definitely mean I totally am, guilty of this, of getting distracted. And I think we live in a very distractible world. So how can we prevent that? How can we work with that? First, the distractions are obviously our phone, our computer, the notifications that keep popping up. It might be family members coming into our space and interrupting, or even our own thoughts can be very intrusive or interruptive sometimes. And how do you work with those? So when it comes to phone and computer notifications, you can, obviously put your phone across the room or silence your phone or use the do not disturb function. I think it's really important to plan maybe when you're reading to tell people, hey, I'm not reachable for this many minutes, or to kind of use a time block kind of way to read for 25 minutes, and then maybe during that 5-minute break, then check your phone if you're waiting on an emergency or you need to check it for various work reasons. Just be mindful of those electronic distractions, because I know they get the best of us, honestly. As far as family or roommates, it's ideal to maybe set up a space in your home that you associate with reading that is comfortable for you, so that you're able to focus and you're kind of able to say, this is, hey, where I read. And then in addition to that, you can tell your family members or your roommates or the people you live with to say, hey, over the next couple hours, I'm going to be reading. Can you not bother me unless it's an emergency? And this sort of sets up those boundaries, which are really important to get you to get the most out of your time and be able to read as much as possible in a certain amount of time. And lastly, our good old thoughts. You guys are all intelligent people, so I'm sure you're thinking a lot as you're reading. So 2 things that can help a lot with these thoughts. One is having just a little piece of paper that if anything comes up that just keeps coming up, writing it down. So this could be, oh no, I need to change the laundry from the washer to the dryer, or oh, I need to pick up that thing in the grocery store. Just a little reminder to yourself that you don't want to forget, obviously. Or a lot of times what happens to me is that I'll be reading something and then it'll make me think of something else that I'll want to Google or look up. And then I'll want to look it up in the moment, but I say no, I'll look it up afterwards, write it down so that during my 5-minute break, I can look it up without ruining the flow of my reading. And third, or along with that, you can also, if you have a certain worry, sometimes just writing down, like, I'm worried I'm going to fail my test tomorrow, or choke on my presentation, whatever it is, just write it down. Just get it out of your head. Sometimes writing it down can help get it out so that you can come back to focusing. Secondly, you can also use a little sheet of paper to write a tally mark every time you get distracted. And this is not meant to be like a comparison of, oh no, I got, distracted 25 times in 25 minutes or 50 times in 25 minutes. It doesn't really matter how many times you've gotten distracted, but rather the point of writing the tally mark is to bring awareness to the fact that you got distracted. So what you can do, you're reading, oh no, I got distracted, write the tally mark, bring yourself back to focusing. And then every time you notice yourself getting distracted, just write a little tally mark and bring yourself back. And again, and eventually you can train your concentration, you can train your focus like a muscle, training yourself to notice, bring yourself back, notice, bring yourself back. And eventually that concentration muscle will be strengthened and you're likely to get distracted less. So again, it's not meant to be a way to measure how much you get distracted, but rather to bring awareness to it. Because sometimes we get distracted, we get halfway down the page and we realize I haven't actually been reading or paying attention to any of this so far. So it's that way to kind of wake yourself up and say, oh yeah, I was distracted. Let's focus. Cool. So lots of ways to reduce distractions, especially that TV, just turn it off, But yeah, skimming or scanning. This is a great way to read faster. Again, I'm kind of going back to that strategic reading. So when you're more familiar with the topic and you're just kind of looking for anything new or looking to review, you can kind of skim the reading, maybe reading the first and last sentence of every paragraph to just identify those main ideas, those key points, so that you know what the reading is covering. If it's a situation where you're looking for specific information, or you're writing a research paper and you're looking for evidence that applies to your research, or your professor says, look up this, who can find out this issue, go, come back next week with an answer, right? You're looking for a specific answer. So in those cases, you want to scan for specific info, meaning that you can kind of breeze through the reading until you found something that's relevant and then read that more in depth. So lots of ways to kind of not have to read every single word. Okay. Then you want to eliminate regressions, excuse me. And essentially what that is rereading what you've already understood. And we're all guilty of this. We're reading and then we're like, oh, maybe I didn't quite understand that. I'm going to go back and read it. Well, if you pretty much understand it, don't go back and read it. We want to kind of prevent this bad habit, maybe by using an index card to cover up what you've already read and just keep going. Obviously, if you really didn't understand it and you need to read it twice, that's totally okay. But I think a lot of us have this, maybe, those of us that might have like imposter syndrome or, want to really make sure we understand everything, we might go back and read it multiple times. But this can be a big time waster. So try to use that index card, or if you're reading online or on the computer, scroll the text up so you're always reading at the top of the screen. And again, this will just save you a lot of time and make sure that you're reading most effectively. 4, you can also use a pointer, which can be your finger or a pencil or anything to kind of help you move your eyes across each line and then down the page. What you can do to help train yourself to read a little faster is to move your pointer slightly faster than your regular reading pace. And this will encourage your eyes and your mind to read at a little faster pace. It's not meant to, don't go so much faster that you're lost, but just as a way to kind of, again, train that muscle of reading faster and just to kind of push yourself a little bit so that you can get, a little quicker and a little swifter as you go along. And if you're scanning, for example, you can maybe zigzag the pointer across the page or focus more in the middle of the page. Just, use that pointer as a way to direct your focus and keep yourself running smoothly down the page. So another tool kind of mentioned is something called the Pomodoro method, which you may or may not have heard of, but essentially it's a good idea to find a period of time that works for you. A lot of people, love 25 minutes. Seems like a good time. It's not too little so that you can actually get something done, but it's not too long that it feels overwhelming. So setting a timer and saying, okay, during this, 25 minutes, I'm going to really focus. I'm going to read as much as I can, and then take a 5-minute break. And during this 5-minute break, you can use it as a time to review what you just learned, kind of just process what you've just read, and help consolidate it before moving on. It's also a good time for like a stretch break, a pee break, you fill up your coffee cup break, or if you're maybe tending to your phone, as I mentioned earlier, you check it for emergencies, but don't go scrolling, because that I'm sure will exceed 5 minutes if you're anything like me. But yeah, just finding a time that works for you. Some people might only, it's best for them to read in 15-minute segments, or you might be more of the mind to read for like 45 minutes. Whatever, find what works for you. No judgment. Just figure out what pace works best for you and how long your attention span is, so that you can get the most out of your reading. Because you don't want to maybe read for 15 minutes and say, okay, I'm going to make it to 25, but then that last 10 minutes you're fried or you're not really paying attention. It's better to just stop yourself at the 15, take your break, and then come back. And it's a way to make sure that you're focused and you're motivated, but you also kind of feel that pressure of like, okay, let's keep going, just 2 more minutes. And if you also want to maybe extend your ability to focus, you can add maybe 1 minute or 5 minutes every week. So you can go from 25 to 30 or whatever, just to kind of help you stay focused, but also expand your attention span. So food for thought. And then last but not least, to read faster, I hate to say it, but read during daytime. And I say I hate to say it because I feel like a lot of you love to read at night. It's very common, and more so because of people's schedules. You feel like, nighttime's the only time you have to read. So I totally understand that. But it is true that our brains function off the circadian rhythm, which is, matches sunlight hours. So it is more likely that you'll be able to focus better when the sun's out. So as much as possible, try to plan in your reading time during daytime, during daylight, because again, it's more likely that you'll read faster. But be that as it may, at the end of the day, it's just important, I think, to schedule in your time to do your reading, because I think a lot of us are better about scheduling in time to maybe do an assignment, but when it comes to reading, it's easier to be like, oh, I'm just going to fit it in here and there, but then it falls by the wayside. So you really got to plan in your schedule, like, okay, for this half an hour, this hour, I'm just going to read a little bit of this and get it done over the course of a week, rather than have it all pile up and then you have to read it over the course of a whole day, which would be so exhausting, I imagine. So it's important to schedule in this time, and important to space it out so that you set yourself up for success. So along the lines of being efficient and scanning and being faster with our readings, we want to think about skimming. So skimming can start thinking big picture to small picture. First, you want to read the title of the article, the book, the chapter, the play, the whatever you're reading. Read the title, think, what do I already know about this subject and what do I want to learn? And this kind of helps you to get primed, get ready to dive into what you're about to read. Then, before deep diving, you can perhaps read the first and last paragraphs of the piece, and this will help you kind of start to understand the author's thesis or argument, and help set you up for an understanding for the evidence that they're maybe about to propose. So after reading the author's thesis, then you can go through and again read that first and last sentence of each paragraph, kind of looking for those key points, those main ideas. And then in addition to those first and last sentences, you also want to just keep your eye out for what are called signposts. And these are words like the most significant contribution is, or the definition of this term is, or first, second, and third, firstly, secondly, and thirdly, most important, things, or talking about a process or a series of steps. Again, those signposts will really help to help indicate where those key points are, things that you want to pay attention to as you're reading. So follow these steps. They'll really help you with your intelligent skimming process and help you get the most out of your reading in the least amount of time. Okay, before we go further, I want to give you another second to kind of practice and take a second for yourselves. So again, you can pause the video and do this, and then you can come back and see what you got out of it. So what I want you to do is read the paragraph once through or twice through, then turn away from the screen, shut your screen, and think about a nice summary sentence, or just think about what's the main takeaway, because there's a lot of words in a paragraph, but at the end of the day, what are they basically saying here, right? So read the paragraph, pause, look away, write down, bullet points or a sentence of what the main takeaway was. So I'll give you a second to do that. Okay, so coming back, basically, I'm sure you all wrote down your own sentences and they were great. But essentially, what I got from the paragraph is that they were saying that speed reading, in the sense that in the way that we, it's talked about in pop culture, kind of, doesn't actually help. It's not actually real. So instead of just reading through every word quickly, we want you to, this is my take on the paragraph, obviously, but I'm biased to say that instead of speed reading, use these tips that I'm giving you to be strategic in what you read, and not just trying to be super fast or to avoid it altogether, because you can do it. You can get through it, and you don't need to be this magical speed reader to get the most out of reading. So I hope that recitation process helped you. Doing something like that where you read it and then try to think for yourself what you just read, that'll help you start to memorize and remember what you're reading if you're summarizing as you go. Awesome. So going off that, so we talked about recitation. Now we're going to talk about marking up your textbook or your book or whatever your reading material is. So the first part of marking up a reading material is underlining or highlighting. And fun fact, this will not lower the buyback price of a book, so definitely go for it. It really helps with reading, as long as you're doing it wisely. So like with the recitation, it's important to read first and then go back and underline or highlight those main ideas, because oftentimes, we don't actually understand what the main idea will be until we finish the paragraph or the section and get a better idea of the whole context of the section, because it could be a scenario when the author brings up all these points and then they're like, actually, these are all wrong and this is why. You know, you might start reading that and be like, oh, this is also important, I'm going to highlight it. And then you realize, oh, scrap that. They were just bringing this up to prove a point, right? So read the section first, then go back and underline or highlight those main ideas, those key takeaways. And ideally, you should be highlighting less than 20% of the reading passage. Now, I know some of you are like, oh my goodness, that's so little. And I definitely understand. I have a lot of students who say, you know, what am I supposed to highlight? Everything's important, so I'm just going to highlight everything. And, you know, my response to that is like, well, if you highlight everything, it's essentially like highlighting nothing. So you want to focus on what's most important. And 20% could mean that you're highlighting a lot of phrases. You know, you don't necessarily need to highlight a whole sentence unless it's the thesis or something. You know, you want to just focus your attention, focus your eyes on those main ideas. And then in addition to highlighting, which helps with those main ideas, you also want to annotate. And this will help you not only with the main ideas, but with retention, with remembering what you're reading. So at the end of every paragraph or every section, write a word or a phrase to kind of just summarize, you know, what the main idea is. This will help you, again, with memorization, but also will help you for referencing the material later. Yeah, so it's really helpful, and here are some examples. So we have here a piece of, you know, literature, and the reader, you know, circled a few words and highlighted other ones. I love to like use squiggly lines and squares, and for me, everything has a purpose. So like I'll circle vocab I don't know, I'll highlight important info, I'll maybe use a squiggly line if something is well written, if it's more of like a literature book and I want to use that quote for something else. And yeah, and then maybe on the side I'll put a star, an exclamation point. So there's lots of little things that you can do that are personal to you, that make sense to you, that help you make sense of the reading and organize it in a way that, you know, makes things pop, because otherwise there's just a lot of words on the page, and it, you know, it's tough to look at it without any rhyme or reason, right? So we see this author, or excuse me, this reader did the highlighting and circling, and then also on the left in the margin they wrote process info, which was going off that process, and then saw the 3 phases of how to process information. Step 1, encoding, then storage, then retrieval, with 2 steps, recall and recognition. And that was just drawn from what they highlighted, and then they just brought it over to the margin so that they could see it clearly and succinctly, which they could then put in their notes or into a presentation, or, you know, use for later. So it's super helpful, super good way to summarize and make sense of your reading as you're skimming, as you're reading. Awesome. And here's another example using e-readers. So a lot of our readings are maybe made into PDFs, and we can highlight them that way, or we can use Kindle, or lots of great e-readers out there that allow you to highlight and also maybe add notes to the side as if you were writing in the margin. So definitely use them. Use those colors to add dimension, you know, make it make sense to you. And yeah, it can be used on paper and digitally. And again, super helpful, super important. Okay, so, you know, just to review and summarize so far, I've been giving you a lot of tips about reading in general and ways to read more efficiently. And so now from here till the end, I'm going to talk and give you some tools that are specific to different types of reading material. So, starting with textbooks, we have something called SQ4R. And SQ4R is an acronym that stands for survey, and then Q for question, and then the 4 R's are read, recite, record notes, and review. So this is a tool that you can use for any time you're reading the textbook. And you'd start off by just surveying the chapter. So asking yourself, you know, what am I about to read? Maybe skimming the introduction and the conclusion, the summary, the learning objectives, looking at those pictures, those graphics, just to kind of prime your mind to say, okay, brain, this is what we're about to learn about, pay attention. And then also to help you estimate how long it will take to read a chapter. So you can plan your time and mentally prepare for, what you're diving into, right? Then here's the interesting part of SQ4R. And the question part, I think, is what's most unique to the SQ4R. And basically what you do is before you actually start reading anything, you look through all of the headings and subheadings and sub-subheadings and turn them into questions. So I like to think it's kind of like a Jeopardy style way of looking at the information. So essentially, if you saw something that said photosynthesis, you would say, what is photosynthesis? Or if it said Sigmund Freud, you'd say, who is Sigmund Freud? Or if it said 3 types of matter, you say, what are the 3 types of matter, right? So you turn all the headings into questions. And you can do this by either writing down the question directly onto your textbook. You could maybe put a sticky note on the textbook and write it down. Or sometimes I'll like to make kind of a Word document and write all my questions, and then I can go back and answer them. So whatever works for you. But at the end of the day, just turn all of your headings, without reading, just turn all the headings into questions. Then you can read. You start reading, but read only one section at a time and read with the intention of answering your question. And so this is really helpful to make your reading be more of an active process. And so instead of just passively reading through everything and saying, okay, what am I trying to get out of this? You actually have a purpose now. You can say, okay, my purpose is to try to figure out who is Sigmund Freud in 3 sentences or less, right? Or it's just to identify the 3 types of matter and give definitions, or it's just to quickly state in my own words what photosynthesis is, right? So you're reading with the intention of answering the question, and then you look away from the text and try to think of the answer in your own words, and then you write that down. So if it's who is Sigmund Freud, you maybe write, why he was important, what's he known for, and you have that as your note. And preferably write in your own words, because then it's showing that you've really retained the information, you've made sense of it. But if there is something specific, you can always write a quick definition down. But at the end of the day, the point is to help you read section by section with the purpose of remembering what you've read and then recording the note based off of the heading. And you repeat this process, read, recite, record notes for every section. And then once you get to the end, you review, look over your notes, try to make sense of what you've read, maybe identify things that you want to go look up later. So just to kind of process everything and take stock of again, what the chapter that you just read. So that's for textbooks. Then for essays, it's a little trickier because there are no headings, right? So instead, what you can do is just as you read, make a line in the margin every time the author changes topics. So this helps you to kind of chunk the essay into headings or into sections without there being official headings. So you separate your essay out into the different sections based on topic, and then you can still, after you go back between each line, write your summary or your note in the heading to just remind you what topic they covered, maybe write those key points in addition to your highlighting and regular annotating. But it'll help you sort of parse out the different topics in an essay if you, again, mark it through and just essentially give it your own heading or your own title. So that's for essays. And then we have good old research articles, which are a main part of graduate school, right? So we have our research articles. Most of us know, or maybe some of us know, the different parts. There's obviously the abstract, which is that little summary in the beginning of a research article where the authors, say basically what their findings are, and the importance of their study. Then there's the introduction, which provides a lot of background information. So where the author is summarizing all of the research that is known about the topic up to this date, and then they say, and here's, the study that I want to do that's going to provide new and different information, right? Then you have your methods / observation / procedure, which is more of the, okay, this is exactly what I did. Here are the step-by-step details for my study. Then you have results, which is that raw data, the specific findings of the study. And then finally, there's always a conclusion or discussion or limitations, implications. There's different ways that authors will title each of these sections, but essentially these are the 5 main sections of a research article. Except for there's also the references at the end, which obviously are what the author referred to in the article, but they're also a great place to go looking for additional articles if you're doing a research yourself or a lit review or something. So those are the 6 sections of a research article, and you might think you should read it from beginning to end, but actually we suggest that you do not read from the first page to the last page. Rather, start with the abstract, read that first, then go to the introduction, then skip to the end, skip to the conclusion, and then come back to those methods and results. And I'll go through that in a second, but essentially this helps you kind of to be more strategic, again, in the way that you read. So if you're first just needing to start with the abstract, you can use that to say, okay, is this even relevant? If it's you're doing your own research, you're trying to see, is this relevant? Do I want to go ahead and read it? Okay, you read the abstract. Just kidding, it's not relevant. Don't go any further. If it is relevant, then you would go to step 2. You read the introduction, you get that necessary background information. You go read the conclusion to kind of see what the results of the study were, getting more details about the findings. And then if you need to go into those methods and result sections, here's the time where you can go and get that deeper detail. If you need to critique the way the study was made, you can go get that information. If you're interested in the results and how they came to these conclusions, the calculations they made, if you want to make a study of your own using similar analyses, you can read this. But again, if you don't need to be in the details, you don't need to get bogged down by this. If your main purpose is just to find out the findings, steps 1, 2, and 3 are your main goals, and 4, 5 are, just to get that really detailed, fine-tuned info. And then lastly, after you do go through those methods and results, it's important maybe to go back to that conclusion just to kind of like refresh and be like, okay, this all makes sense now, now that I've gotten the full picture. So don't read the article from beginning to end, but rather start in the beginning, go to the end, and then go back to the middle. It'll help you a lot in the long run. And then, yeah, again, skim, review, make sure you understood the whole article in its entirety. So when you're doing research articles, obviously you'll be needing to take notes. And taking notes off research articles, especially if you're writing a paper based off of them or some sort of lit review, it can be tricky. So it's important to find a system that works for you. You could create a research article summary sheet that has all of the author's information, all the publication information, and then a space to maybe write the hypothesis, the methods, and then the findings, right? Or you can use an outline to write the citation out and then take your notes. You can also use technology software like Evernote and Zotero to keep track of all this information, and I'll describe that in a second, but I would want to point out, like, something I try to think of when I'm doing research is to make sure, as you're reading, to be very careful in the way that you're taking notes. So if you write a quote, make sure to indicate that it's a quote and get that page number right away. Or if you're paraphrasing, make note of that. And if you happen to have a note that's a thought of your own, make note of that too, because as you're taking notes, this is all going to be fresh in your head. But when you go back to the notes and you see a quote, you're like, oh shoot, I don't know where this is from. Or you see a note and you're like, is this paraphrased or is this my thought? You know, to avoid the plagiarism, you want to be really careful in how you organize, how you store, and how you write your notes. So think about what works for you. You can use something like Evernote, which syncs across all your devices, or you can use Zotero, which has a built-in citation manager in it. Fun enough, or happily enough, we have Zotero workshops at the library. The library offers workshops kind of explaining how to use Zotero. They also have a website that's just an info guide that you can read at any time. And yeah, Zotero is just a great way to kind of keep track of everything. There are, I think, other more recent ones that you might be interested in as well, but at the end of the day, moral of the story, keep track of your notes, you know, for your research articles, because it can be a lot. Awesome. Last but not least, we have EVOKER for literature. And so everything up till all of the tools that I've just described are all for really nonfiction, right? But we might have a major who's, you know, an English major or a drama major, or somebody who's like, well, I'm not really reading to take notes in the same way that you've been talking about. Well, this is for you. This is for you. EVOKER is good for fiction books, essays, drama, plays, poems, philosophy, things like that. And it's another acronym. EVOKER stands for Explore, Vocabulary, Oral Reading, Key Ideas, Evaluate, and Recapitulate. So, starting with Explore, this is your sort of first read through where you just read it and mark any unknown vocabulary. Just mark it. Don't look up the definition because it might pull you away or distract you from your first read. Then, once you finish reading the piece for the first time, go look up all your vocabulary words, get the definitions, you know, read it in context so that you get a better understanding. Then, because these pieces that you're reading are fiction, they're likely to be stories, it's a really good idea to actually read the story or the piece out loud, because then, you know, if it's something like Shakespeare where it's hard to make sense of the language, you can read it aloud to kind of give it that intonation, make the dialogue make sense to you, bring in those emotions. Or even if it's not a purely, you know, if it's not all dialogue in the sense that it's a play, it could be, you know, a novel, this can still give you the opportunity to make the story come to life and make it feel more real, so that you can then make sense of it and analyze it and picture it in your head. So after you've read it the second time, now you can kind of start to analyze those key ideas, those themes, identify any motifs, make note of that, and then you can start to evaluate, okay, what's the maybe author's argument, or evaluate it based on how it might compare to other pieces that you've read, or think about the writing in context or the author's life, you know, or historical context. Here's, you know, after now you've gotten through most of the pure storyline, that you can start to analyze those key ideas and evaluate those literary mechanisms, right? And then last but not least, as again, you might see a theme, you always want to review at the end. So think about how everything makes sense in its entirety, maybe read it once through just quickly to kind of put it all together, and then you're good to go. So that's EVOKER for literature, and that is our last tool. So before I wrap up, I just want to show you some resources. There's some about reading strategies, reading research papers online. Owl Purdue is a classic, great one for citations and other tools. And then that link for Zotero, which I mentioned, that's here as well. So you can pause the screen, look at these websites. And before I go, I also just want to remind you that we're available. We're here to help you with our coaching, with our workshops. So please check us out. And before you go anywhere, I would suggest maybe after you end this video to kind of think to yourself, okay, what are maybe 2 or 3 things that I'm going to take away today? Like, what did Rebecca say? What was a tip she suggested that was like, oh, I could actually try that. I should actually try that. So it could be, you know, using that distraction pad, or setting a timer for 25 minutes, or organizing your notes better, or, you know, putting your phone on do not disturb. Whatever it is, maybe go back and write down 2 to 3 things that you want to commit to doing this week, or this semester, because I gave a lot of tips, and they can be overwhelming, or there's a lot of them, and you might not know where to start, but just say, okay, I'm going to start with these, and then I can always add more later. But I want you to think about, as your way to review this workshop, what am I going to commit to in the next few weeks? So, awesome. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you all, and I hope you got something out of this, and that you have a great semester. Happy reading.